Hello and welcome to another episode of Bupsa's Dharma Lounge. This is a time and a place for us to discuss all things Dharma. If you're in the situation where you can, pour yourself a beverage and relax. If you're driving, just listen. Welcome. Hello, I'm Bupsa Frank Jude, and I'm glad you can join me for this episode of Bupsa's Dharma Lounge. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. If you've been listening and you find any value in this podcast, the ways that you can support me most is through subscribing. And if you all who are listening just recommend to one other person, all right, word of mouth can be really valuable. Also, besides subscribing, if you have the option to rate 4 and 5 stars, really cool. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit like. I think there's even a place for love, and make some comments. I'm open to suggestions for topics that you might like for me to cover. And before going into this episode's discussion, I want to thank those who go beyond by supporting this podcast through dana. Dana is just a gift. Previously in traditions, it was ways that the laity could support the Buddhist Sangha with food, medicine, and clothing. Nowadays, it's money. And so in the links, there's ways that you can offer dana through PayPal, Venmo, different ways. But also just keep in mind that it's not about how much. It's like if you feel this is of value and you'd like to support it, then any gift is really gratefully accepted. And in that spirit, I'd like to thank those who've offered dana since the last episode, including Gabion, Sally Weber, Chatra, Sandy Greenberg, Jenny Kendall, thank you very much for your continued support. Jabuna Allison Brown, and Jishan Carolyn Hill. Thank you all for your continued support. So in episode 26, entitled, Isn't All Yoga Mindful?, I introduced the concept of mindfulness yoga and what makes mindfulness yoga different from simply saying we're going to be practicing yoga mindfully. And then in episode 27, Hatha Yoga and the Foundations of Mindfulness, I introduced the 4 foundations. Sometimes they're known as the 4 establishments. I often call them the 4 domains of mindfulness because they're areas of human life that we bring mindfulness to. And so I'm continuing in this series, and what's going to be different this time is I'm going to be simultaneously dropping 2 episodes. This one, which introduces the first domain or the first establishment of mindfulness, the body, and an accompanying episode with a short asana practice based upon this domain to hopefully give you some idea of ways that we can practice asana as a true mindfulness practice. Right? So mindfulness of the body within the body is how you see it described by the Buddha. This is the first domain or the first foundation of mindfulness. And if we think about the body within the body, one way of thinking about that phrase is to remind us that we're not some distant observer of the body. We don't exist up in our brain, somewhere up in the head, looking down at the body. Awareness is felt throughout the body. The image I like to use is just as when you put a sponge into a body of water, it is fully saturated evenly throughout. We want our mindfulness to permeate the whole body. Easier said than done, but that's really what we're looking to do. And when the Buddha presents this first establishment, this first domain, his first instruction is to bring mindfulness to breathing. He encourages us to simply, as he says, know an in-breath as an in-breath, know an out-breath as an out-breath, know a long breath as a long breath, know a short breath as a short breath. And this is just observing the breath as it is. And we could assume that as an oral tradition, long and short, in and out, are short forms of expressing all of the characteristics of breathing. Is the breathing shallow? Is it deep? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Right? We really want to become intimately familiar with the experience of breathing. Right? We notice the various and varying qualities of the breathing. Again, deep, shallow, fast, slow. Some are long, some are short. And with this non-manipulative form of attention, we are becoming more clear about the true nature of breathing. We say a breath as if it's a thing, but when we really pay attention, we realize there's no thingness to it, right? And we're also, in a way, cultivating a transcendence of the pairs of opposites. I mean, everyone wants their breath to be smooth and perhaps deep and even, but really what we are practicing is breathing as it is. And right now, it might be that the breath is short and fast and a little rough. So let's just, right now, even just take a little time to see what we're talking about here with this simple exercise. So I invite you to sit comfortably. Your eyes can be closed or maybe slightly open. Relax your jaw. Maybe allow some space between the upper and lower molars. Maybe even the lips are slightly parted. The tongue is relaxed, its tip touching above the front teeth on the hard palate. And as you breathe, notice, where do you experience the movement of the breathing? Is it the belly? Is it the chest? Is it the ribs expanding? As you inhale, falling as you exhale. Just rest your attention here. And again, if you're driving, you can do this later. No straining, no forcing. Rest your attention on breathing with the same lightness as a butterfly settling onto a flower. Now you'll see right away that the mind wanders. But that's what the mind always is doing, but most of the time we're carried away with it. But now that we're trying to focus on just the breathing, we become more acutely aware of when the mind wanders. So a lot of beginners get irritated when they see the mind wandering, failing to see that actually that's a moment of mindfulness. Nothing to get irritated or frustrated with, just let it go and come back to the feeling of breathing. Now the next stage of satipatthana is to expand the awareness from wherever you're feeling the breathing down and up through the body, like that sponge being fully saturated with water. So you're aware of your posture. If you're leaning one way or the other, maybe you could make a micro adjustment. We're deepening the sense of embodiment here. The body, the breath is always in the present moment. So when the attention is fully absorbed in the body, there's a full integrated sense of presence. Now, if you've been joining me in this, you can allow the eyes to fully open. That quality of attentiveness to breathing is really what we want to continue throughout the practice of postures, right? Stay fully present through mindfulness of the breathing in whatever asana or posture we're in. And even as, and especially maybe as we move from one posture to the next. When we notice the mind leaning away from our experience of an asana, we can remember to come back to the breath. In this way, the breath becomes the thread, the sutra, right? The word suturing, like threading, comes from the Sanskrit sutra. It becomes the sutra or the thread upon which we weave the practices of our postures. And then with that kind of attunement, we begin to see that the qualities of the breathing are conditioned by the position or posture that the body is in. You notice that breathing is different if we're in a forward bend than when we're in a back bend or when we're in a twist. And then while we maintain a posture, we can see that the breath changes, right? We can also see how the breathing conditions the body. Right? It affects the experience of the posture. The twist feels different if we're inhaling or exhaling. So if we really pay attention to the implications of all this, we begin to see the core teaching of the Buddha. All experience, all phenomena are conditioned, which therefore means there's no real autonomous thing to speak of, right? So again, we say breath like it's a thing. When we really pay attention to it, we realize there's just breathing, right? And all of this is part of the flow of experience. Through this practice, we begin to see that these processes are all contingent. They are selfless, constantly changing. Bringing attention then to the parts of the body, the Buddha becomes very detailed in recognizing different parts of the body. And it's pretty detailed. He talks about the hair on your head, the hair on the body, your teeth, your nose, your eyes. He talks about the heart, the stomach, the bowels. He talks about the urine in the bladder, the feces in the colon. It's all part of the body right now, right? We tend to think of it as waste, but it's there now. It's in there, right? And often when people begin this practice, they begin to realize that, yeah, it's more pleasant to contemplate the hair than the urine or the mucus. But really, when we begin to practice this, we become and establish a more even, more realistic awareness of the body, right? We get beyond revulsion. We get beyond attachment when we see the more clear reality. There's a funny thing about the parts. Sometimes, we tend to think again that hair might look beautiful on someone, right? I ask people, all right, so you think the person's hair is beautiful, but what would you think about it as you have to take their hair out of the drain of the bathtub after they've taken a shower? And everybody's nose wrinkles up. And I was like, well, you just said that hair was beautiful. How come now you're getting repulsed? And it's because we fail to see that the beauty is contingent upon the fact that the hair is where we like to think it belongs. And it's probably styled and everything else. So the beauty itself arises contingently on other factors, right? And all of our perception about the hair is contingent by those factors. Now, an exercise based upon the parts of the body that the Buddha offers in Satipatthana has the practitioner systematically bringing attention to the various parts of the body and ideally giving equal attention to each part, noticing if there is any reactivity, and again, not getting caught by the reactivity, just noticing it, right? And so again, this is how you work, right? Hair on the head, eyes, nose, all the way down. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh has offered a variation on the body part practice, which I offer in a previous episode, smiling to the body, right? And what he does there is he brings in the internal smile from the Qigong practice and tradition and smiles to different parts of the body. The reason for that was that he noticed that so many people do have elements of body dysmorphia. A lot of people who come to yoga don't like aspects of the body, and so we smile to all the parts. But the original purpose of the practice was to create a kind of equanimity, an even balanced view of the body. After that, in the Satipatthana, he presents the contemplation of the elements that make up the body. In some versions of the Satipatthana, it's the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. But there are some versions of the Satipatthana that add the fifth element, space. Right? Now, these elements in the yoga philosophy are not things like earth. It's not just the dirt that's out there. It's the principle of stability, of stillness, that sense of solidity. Right? The water element is the liquid parts of the body in a sense of liquid flowing quality. Fire is heat, and so on. Air is movement, right? But I offer a contemporary version of this practice that does think about the elements that make up this body. And there are roughly 22, there are more than that, but there are 22 major elements, right? And so, for instance, we're carbon-based organisms, right? This is not some special carbon. It's the same carbon that's responsible for global warming, right? The body is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, a lot of water, right? This is not some special water. It's the same water that flows in our streams and rivers, right? As Thich Nhat Hanh says, if you want the body to be healthy, we need a healthy environment, because there's no true hard and fast separation. Through contemplating the elements, the yogi begins to understand that life is not isolated in her body. There's no self separate from these elements. In Thich Nhat Hanh's version of the first mindfulness training of ahimsa, non-harming, it says, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to protect the life of people, animals, plants, and minerals. Now, on the surface, of course, minerals don't have life, right? The carbon. But again, if we are carbon-based, then where do we create the hard and fast separation, right? We need to take care of the elements in the planet so that the elements that make up this body are healthy, right? Before we throw away anything, we could ask, where is away? Now, in the Satipatthana, the final practice that we find in the first foundation is contemplating the decomposition of the body, corpse. And most yoga practices come to an end with shavasana, corpse posture, right? So that's the existential truth. This body is of the nature to die and then eventually decompose and return to the elements of the earth, right? Looking deeply into the impermanent nature of the body, perhaps we're not so motivated to take life for granted. We see the preciousness of this life, right? We don't want to lose our life in distraction and dispersion, right? As it says in the Zen tradition, do not squander your life. Now, I will say, in any drop-in yoga class, I don't go into the decomposition of the body, because that could be pretty upsetting for someone not prepared and not practicing within the context of the fullness of the practice. But when people get to a point of ripeness or maturity in their practice, contemplating decomposition can be profoundly liberating, right? The effect of this meditation liberates us, right, from the tension and strain that we create in attempting to deny the only thing we know for certain, that we will die. So those are the practices that are contained in the first foundation of mindfulness, beginning with the breath, expanding to the whole body, bringing mindfulness to all the postures and activities of the body, the anatomical parts of the body, the elements that make up the body, and finally, the final fate of this body, death and decomposition. And so now, either now or at some point where you can set aside some time, I invite you to practice with me mindfulness yoga of the first domain, the body, in the episode that is dropped along with this one. This is episode 28. Episode 29 is mindfulness yoga practice, first domain. I do hope that you're enjoying these episodes and perhaps joining me in the practice. So once again, I ask you to subscribe, share it with friends, other yogis that you know, and if you're so moved, consider offering some dana. I don't charge for this. I will never charge or create any subscription that way. So I thank you in advance. Be well.